This school needs to modernize, and frankly, Diana, your methods are outdated, Superintendent James Wright declared, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression that made my blood boil. The board and I feel it's best if you consider early retirement. We need someone who can bring this district into the 21st century. I gripped the armrests of my chair, keeping my face carefully neutral despite the shock and anger coursing through me. After 20 years as principal of Westlake High School in Portland, Oregon, I was being pushed out by a superintendent who'd been in the district for less than 6 months. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. And if I decline this suggestion? James adjusted his expensive tie, a habit I'd noticed whenever he was about to deliver what he thought was a crushing blow. Then we'll need to implement a performance improvement plan. The documentation process has already begun. I'm afraid your evaluation this year shows significant concerns about your ability to embrace technological advancements and modern educational approaches. My name is Diana Morales, and at 55 years old, I had dedicated my entire professional life to education. I started as an English teacher, worked my way up to department head, then vice principal, and finally principal of Westlake High. Under my leadership, our graduation rates climbed from 76% to 94%, and over 80% of our students continued to higher education. I prided myself on knowing every student's name and something about their circumstances. My door was always open to students, teachers, and parents alike. But apparently, all that counted for nothing in the eyes of Superintendent Wright, who seemed determined to make his mark by implementing flashy tech initiatives and restructuring the entire district in his image. I'll need time to consider my options, I replied, rising from the chair. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing how deeply his words had wounded me. Of course, he said with a condescending smile. Take the weekend. But I'll need your decision by Monday morning. The board is eager to move forward with our plans for Westlake. As I left his office, I noticed Nancy, his assistant, avoiding my eyes. She had been with the district even longer than I had, and I wondered if she was next on his chopping block. Walking to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, but also an unexpected feeling of potential freedom. For 2 decades, I had put Westlake first, often at the expense of my personal life. Maybe this forced retirement could be an opportunity rather than an ending. Little did James Wright know, but his dismissive attitude toward my experience and accomplishments would come back to haunt him in ways neither of us could imagine. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. I spent the weekend in a daze, alternating between rage and despair. My husband, Miguel, listened patiently as I vented my frustrations, his calm presence anchoring me when I felt adrift. "You've given that school your heart and soul, Diana," he said on Sunday evening as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Maybe it's time to think about what you want, not what Westlake needs." Miguel had retired from his engineering job 2 years earlier and had been gently suggesting I consider doing the same. We had dreams of traveling, visiting our daughter in Spain, and spending more time with our grandchildren. But I had always brushed these suggestions aside, convinced the school still needed me. "I'm not ready to be put out to pasture," I replied, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "I still have so much to contribute." "No one said anything about pasture," Miguel chuckled, reaching for my hand. "But maybe there are other ways to contribute that don't involve dealing with bureaucrats like Wright." The next morning, I arrived at Superintendent Wright's office 10 minutes early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit I reserved for board meetings and parent conferences. I wanted to face this moment with dignity. "Have you made your decision?" James asked without preamble, not even offering me a seat. "Yes," I replied, standing tall. "I'll accept the early retirement package." A flash of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by satisfaction. Clearly, he had expected more resistance. "Excellent. Human Resources will contact you with the paperwork. We'll announce your retirement at the end of the month. You can use the time until then to tie up loose ends." "I'd like to tell my staff personally," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Of course," he replied dismissively. "The district appreciates your years of service, Diana." The words sounded hollow, a perfunctory acknowledgement of 2 decades of dedication, but I simply nodded, turned, and walked out, my head held high. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, tearful goodbyes, and cleaning out my office. The staff organized a retirement party, where teachers shared stories of our years together. Many students, past and present, came to wish me well. Their genuine affection and appreciation meant more to me than any formal recognition from the district ever could. I left Westlake High School without fanfare on a Friday afternoon, carrying a box of mementos and leaving behind a career that had defined me for so long. As I drove away from the campus for the last time as principal, I felt both a crushing sense of loss and a strange, unfamiliar lightness. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. 3 months into my retirement, I was restless. Miguel and I had taken a 2-week trip to Spain to visit our daughter, Elena, and her family. The break had been wonderful, but upon returning home, I found myself adrift. I volunteered at the local library, took up gardening, and even tried painting, a hobby I'd abandoned decades ago. Yet nothing filled the void left by my career. One rainy Tuesday morning in October, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Catherine Jimenez, Commissioner of the State Education Board. I had met her a few times at conferences, but couldn't imagine why she would be contacting me. "Diana, I've been following the situation at Westlake with interest," she said after exchanging pleasantries. "I understand Superintendent Wright encouraged your early retirement." Her diplomatic phrasing made me smile wryly. "That's one way of putting it," I replied. "I thought as much," Catherine sighed. "James has a reputation for, let's call it aggressive modernization, but that's not why I'm calling. I'm heading a new state initiative focused on educational reform, and I need someone with your experience to lead a key component." My heart raced as she outlined the project, a comprehensive review of educational practices across the state, with the goal of developing guidelines that balanced innovative approaches with proven teaching methods. The position would involve visiting schools, consulting with administrators and teachers, and ultimately helping shape educational policy at the state level. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because you have a track record of success that speaks for itself," Catherine replied. "And because I value experience and wisdom over flashy new approaches that haven't been tested by time." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very qualities that James Wright had dismissed as outdated were exactly what Catherine was seeking. I told her I needed time to consider the offer, but in truth, I had already made my decision. After discussing it with Miguel that evening, I called Catherine back the next morning to accept the position. The following Monday, I started my new role as Senior Educational Consultant for the State Education Board. The salary was nearly twice what I had earned as principal, and the work was intellectually stimulating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was using my experience to influence educational policy on a scale far beyond what I could have achieved at Westlake. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on my former school, through friends still teaching there. The new principal, Brandon Peters, handpicked by Wright for his enthusiasm for technology and innovative teaching methods, was struggling. Teachers were resigning at an alarming rate, discipline problems were on the rise, and parents were beginning to complain. 6 months after my departure, I received a disturbing call from Eleanor Garcia, the veteran math teacher who had become my closest ally during my tenure at Westlake. "Diana, it's a disaster here," she whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "Everything you built is falling apart. The students are suffering, and no one seems to care as long as they can tout their new technology initiatives in press releases." I hung up feeling a complex mixture of vindication and profound sadness. I had poured my heart into that school, and it hurt to hear it was floundering. But a small, petty part of me couldn't help thinking that James Wright was reaping what he had sown. January brought with it not only a new year, but also the first round of standardized testing scores since my departure from Westlake. The results were nothing short of catastrophic. Westlake's scores had plummeted, dropping below state averages for the first time in 15 years. Reading proficiency had decreased by 18%, math by 22%, and overall student achievement indicators showed alarming declines across all grade levels. The local newspaper, the Portland Tribune, ran a front-page story analyzing the dramatic decline, complete with graphs showing Westlake's steady rise under my leadership, followed by the current precipitous fall. The article stopped short of directly blaming the new administration, but quoted several parents and anonymous teachers expressing concerns about the rapid changes implemented since my retirement. I was at a conference in Salem when my phone started buzzing incessantly with texts from former colleagues sharing the article and expressing their dismay. I excused myself to read the piece in the hotel lobby, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. While part of me felt validated, a larger part was heartbroken for the students whose education was suffering. That evening, as I was preparing for dinner with fellow consultants, I received an unexpected call from the superintendent's office. James Wright's assistant asked if I would be available for a meeting the following week. I agreed, curiosity getting the better of me. 5 days later, I found myself sitting across from James Wright once again, though the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Gone was his smug confidence, replaced by poorly concealed anxiety. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights, and his usually immaculate desk was cluttered with papers and reports. "Thank you for coming, Diana," he began, his tone markedly different from our last encounter. "I wanted to discuss some challenges we're facing at Westlake." "The test scores," I said simply. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Among other things, we've had some unexpected difficulties implementing our new policies." I waited, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. "The board is concerned," he continued finally. "They've asked me to consider bringing in outside consultation to address the situation." I almost laughed. "And you thought of me? How ironic." James cleared his throat. "Your experience with the school would be valuable. We're prepared to offer a consulting contract." "No," I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. "No?" he echoed, confusion evident on his face. "I'm not interested in a consulting contract with the district," I explained. "My position with the state keeps me quite busy, and frankly, I'm not convinced the current administration values the kind of experience I bring to the table." His face flushed at the thinly veiled criticism. "The situation has changed." "Indeed it has," I agreed, standing to signal the end of our conversation. "But my answer remains no. I wish you and Principal Peters the best of luck in addressing the challenges at Westlake." As I turned to leave, James called after me, an edge of desperation in his voice. "The board is meeting next week to discuss leadership changes. This could affect Peters, and possibly me." I paused at the door, offering him a sympathetic look that required more acting skill than I knew I possessed. "Education is a challenging field, James. Not everyone is cut out for it long term." Walking out of his office felt like closing a chapter. I had no desire to help salvage James Wright's career, nor did I want to return to Westlake under his administration. But as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the students and teachers still at the school. They deserved better than to be casualties in an administrative power struggle. When I arrived home, I found an email from Catherine Jimenez waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, "Westlake situation. Urgent discussion needed." Catherine's email was brief but pointed. The State Education Board was considering intervention at Westlake due to the alarming decline in performance metrics. She wanted to meet with me before making any decisions, given my history with the school. I replied immediately, agreeing to a breakfast meeting the following morning. That night, I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Westlake. Beside me, Miguel stirred. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice thick with drowsiness. "Just thinking about Westlake," I admitted. I don't want to get pulled back into that situation, but I keep thinking about the students. Miguel propped himself up on one elbow. You've always put the students first, Diana. That's what made you an exceptional principal. Whatever you decide, I know it'll come from that place. His words settled something within me, and I finally drifted off to sleep with a clearer sense of purpose. The next morning, over coffee and croissants at a quiet cafe, Catherine laid out the state's concerns about Westlake in stark terms. The board is considering designating Westlake as a school in crisis, which would trigger mandatory state intervention, she explained. Given your intimate knowledge of the school and your current role with us, I wanted your input before we proceed. I considered my words carefully. What would this intervention entail? A complete review of administrative practices, curriculum implementation, and teacher support systems. Depending on our findings, we could mandate leadership changes and implement state-supervised improvement protocols, which would effectively end James Wright's career, I observed. Catherine met my gaze steadily. Possibly, yes, and likely Peter's as well. But our concern is the students, not protecting careers. As it should be, I agreed. But a state takeover would be traumatic for the school community. There might be a less disruptive approach. I'm listening, Catherine said, leaning forward. What if, instead of a formal intervention, the state appointed an interim educational advisor to work with the current administration? Someone with the authority to implement changes, but without the stigma of a complete takeover. Catherine's eyes lit up. You're suggesting a compromise that saves face for the district, while still giving us control over the situation. She paused, studying me. Would you consider taking on that role? The question hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately. I had moved on, found a new professional identity beyond Westlake. But another part knew that this might be the best chance to protect what I had built there. It would have to be temporary, I said finally. 6 months at most. And I'd need complete authority over educational decisions. I can arrange that, Catherine replied, already pulling out her tablet to make notes. But you should know that Superintendent Wright will likely resist. I allowed myself a small smile. Let me worry about James Wright. The plan came together quickly after that. Catherine drafted a proposal for the state board, positioning the educational recovery specialist role as a supportive measure rather than a punitive one. Within days, the board approved the position, and Catherine officially offered it to me. The compensation package was stunning, 5 times my former salary as principal, with the understanding that it was a temporary assignment with extraordinary responsibilities. I would retain my state consultant position, returning to it full-time once Westlake was stabilized. Before accepting, I laid out my conditions: complete autonomy in educational decisions, the authority to reorganize staffing as needed, and direct accountability to the state board, rather than to Superintendent Wright. Catherine agreed to everything, adding that the district board had been informed of the arrangement and had approved it, albeit with some resistance from Wright. As I signed the contract, I felt a strange sense of closure mixed with anticipation. I wasn't returning to reclaim my old position. I was walking into something entirely new, with far more power and resources than I'd ever had as principal. Wright's going to view this as a personal attack, Catherine warned as we finalized the paperwork. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but that's his problem, not mine. News of my appointment spread through the district like wildfire. By the time the official announcement went out, most of the Westlake staff had already heard through the grapevine. My phone filled with messages from former colleagues, some expressing relief, others concern, but most simply saying, "Thank goodness you're coming back." On Monday morning, I arrived at Westlake an hour before classes began, wanting to reacquaint myself with the building before facing the inevitable confrontation with James Wright and Brandon Peters. The school looked the same from the outside, but inside, subtle changes were evident. Motivational posters had been replaced with corporate-looking banners touting technological innovation, and several traditional classroom spaces had been converted into what appeared to be underutilized digital learning hubs. I was examining one of these spaces when I heard rapid footsteps approaching. James Wright rounded the corner, his face flushed with anger. "This is completely unacceptable," he hissed, keeping his voice low despite his obvious rage. "You manipulated the state board into creating this position." "Good morning to you too, James," I replied calmly. "And no, I didn't. The board approached me after reviewing Westlake's abysmal test scores and concerning teacher turnover rates. This is a transparent attempt at revenge," he insisted. "You couldn't accept being replaced, so you're using your connections to undermine me." I regarded him steadily. "This isn't about you or me. It's about the students whose education is suffering. Based on the data, your modernization has resulted in the worst academic performance this school has seen in over a decade." Before he could respond, Brandon Peters appeared, looking anxious and disheveled. At 34, he was young for a principal, with an impressive resume that included a doctorate in educational technology, but minimal actual classroom experience. James had touted him as a visionary when announcing him as my replacement. "Dr. Morales," Brandon greeted me stiffly. "I wasn't aware you'd be here so early." "I wanted to get reacquainted with the building," I explained. "And please, call me Diana. We'll be working closely together for the next several months." Brandon shot a nervous glance at James, who intervened quickly. "Actually, Dr. Morales, I've scheduled a district-wide administrative meeting this morning. Principal Peters needs to attend, so your orientation will have to wait." I smiled pleasantly. "I don't need an orientation, James. I ran this school for 20 years, and I'm afraid Dr. Peters will have to miss your meeting. We have a more pressing appointment with the department heads in 15 minutes to discuss immediate intervention strategies." James's face darkened. "You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted, producing the document Catherine had prepared. "As outlined in my appointment letter, which was approved by both the state board and your district board, I have the authority to prioritize educational recovery activities over routine administrative functions. You're welcome to join our meeting, of course, but Dr. Peters' presence is non-negotiable." Brandon looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with being caught in the power struggle. Finally, he straightened his shoulders. "I'll stay for the department meeting. The district meeting can proceed without me." James glared at me, then at Brandon. "Fine. But this discussion isn't over." He turned and stalked away, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. "That went well," I remarked dryly. Brandon let out a nervous laugh. "He warned me you'd be formidable." "I'm not here to be your adversary, Brandon," I said sincerely. "I'm here because these students deserve better than what they're getting right now. If you're willing to work with me instead of against me, we might actually be able to turn things around." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that. To be honest, this has been the most challenging year of my career." "It's about to get more challenging," I warned him. "But if we do this right, it might also become the most rewarding." The transformation of Westlake began immediately. After meeting with the department heads, I assembled the entire staff after school to outline my approach. Standing in the auditorium where I had addressed them so many times before, I felt both nostalgia and renewed purpose. "I'm not here to undo everything that's been implemented," I explained. "Innovation has its place, but we've lost sight of fundamentals. Starting tomorrow, we're going back to basics while thoughtfully integrating technology where it genuinely enhances learning, not replaces effective teaching." The relief on many faces was palpable. Though some of James's loyalists looked skeptical, most of the faculty seemed ready to embrace a more balanced approach. Over the next few weeks, I systematically evaluated every new initiative implemented under Brandon's leadership. Some were worth keeping with modifications, but many were clearly hindering rather than helping. The paperless classroom mandate had left students without crucial reference materials. The reduction in direct instruction time in favor of self-guided digital exploration had created significant knowledge gaps. The elimination of traditional reading assignments in English classes had led to plummeting literacy rates. Brandon, to his credit, proved more open to change than I had anticipated. As we reviewed the data together, he acknowledged the flaws in his approach. "I was so focused on innovation that I lost sight of effectiveness," he admitted during one of our daily briefings. James was pushing for visible changes to showcase to the board, and I wanted to impress him. "Innovation without purpose is just disruption," I replied. "But you have good instincts when you're not trying to please others." By the end of the first month, we had reinstated core instructional practices while keeping the best elements of the new programs. Teachers reported feeling supported again, and students were responding positively to the more structured environment. James, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent from Westlake, choosing to communicate through terse emails rather than face me directly. But I knew the confrontation was coming as the end of the quarter approached, and the board would expect a progress report. The quarterly board meeting was held in the district's central office, a modern building that always felt oddly sterile to me. I arrived early, prepared with comprehensive data showing the initial impact of our interventions. Though it had only been 8 weeks, we were already seeing improvements in attendance, classroom engagement, and preliminary assessment scores. James entered the boardroom minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, flanked by 2 district administrators I recognized as his closest allies. He nodded curtly in my direction, but took a seat as far from me as possible. As the meeting began, Board President Olivia Thompson called on James to provide his quarterly district update. He spent 20 minutes highlighting achievements from other schools in the district, mentioning Westlake only in passing as undergoing state-mandated review. His omission was glaring, but not unexpected. When my turn came, I presented a detailed analysis of Westlake's situation, the factors that had led to the decline, the specific interventions we had implemented, and the measurable improvements already taking place. I was careful to frame everything in terms of student outcomes rather than administrative failures. In just 2 months, we're seeing a 12% increase in daily completed assignments, a 15% decrease in behavioral incidents, and significant gains in our weekly assessment metrics, I explained, displaying the graphs on the boardroom screen. Teachers report higher job satisfaction, and parent complaints have decreased by more than half. Board members leaned forward, clearly impressed by the data. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat as I continued. None of this required expensive technology or radical restructuring, I concluded. Simply a return to proven educational practices, thoughtfully combined with appropriate technological tools. Our students are responding because they once again have the structure and support they need to succeed. When I finished, the boardroom erupted in questions. Not hostile ones, but genuine inquiries about the specifics of our approach. As I addressed each one, I could see James growing increasingly agitated, his carefully constructed narrative about outdated methods crumbling before his eyes. The final blow came when Olivia Thompson asked directly, "Superintendent Wright, given these results, do you plan to implement similar approaches in other struggling schools in the district?" James had no choice but to acknowledge the success. "We're evaluating the data to determine which elements might be applicable district-wide," he managed, his voice strained. As the meeting adjourned, several board members approached me to express their appreciation for my candid assessment and impressive results. James slipped out without speaking to anyone, his defeat evident in his hurried departure. I hadn't sought to humiliate him publicly, but the contrast between his evasive report and my data-driven presentation couldn't have been clearer. In the end, the students' success was a more effective revenge than any confrontation could have been.